You guys have been asking, and trust me, I've been seeing all the requests. You Know You're Right tone was by far the most requested thing I've gotten this entire year. But with the help of an amazing and generous friend, I got the gear that I believe will get me the closest as I can possibly get to that guitar sound with my setup. I'm really proud of how my You Know You're Right cover came out performance and tone-wise, and it's probably my favorite cover I've put out up until this point. In this video, I will be breaking down in detail what I did to recreate Kurt Cobain's final studio guitar tone. If you haven't checked out my cover yet, this video is essentially a part 2 to that, so I will link the cover right here so you can check it out quick. So we're gonna go over what gear Kurt used and then what I used and my settings. So let's jump right into it. You Know You're Right is Nirvana's final song, recorded at their final studio session on January 30th, 1994 at Robert Lang Studios in Seattle. They had the entire weekend booked at the studio January 28th through the 30th, but Kurt did not show up until the last day on the 30th. For the first 2 days, Chris, Dave, and Nirvana guitar tech Ernie Bailey recorded a series of jams and demos. Some of those demos would later go on to become Foo Fighters songs, such as Exhausted and Big Me. When Kurt finally showed up on the final day, there was an immediate problem. He did not bring any gear with him. Chris and Dave had brought their own gear, and they had just assumed that Kurt would too. It was looking like the session was going to be called off, but Ernie really saved the day here. As Nirvana fans, there is so much we have to thank Ernie Bailey for, but this is a big one. The recording of You Know You're Right would not exist without Ernie, and here's why. Here's a quote from Ernie.
Chris and Dave had brought their own gear, and we assumed that Kurt would do the same. It looked like we were going to call the session off, but I had a Univox guitar I'd reworked for Kurt out in the car, and he'd brought a similar one for me to set up for him. He used the studio's Marshall 50-watt combo, which he hated, and my pedal board, which luckily had a Boss distortion pedal on it. The pedal wasn't the same one he favored, but we got close to something he was okay with.
So with Kurt present, and with a quickly assembled rig, the final Nirvana session got underway. They had first recorded a 20-minute jam, and then they got to work on You Know You're Right. Chris has said that this is a song that they played and worked on during sound checks, presumably during the In Utero tour. He has said,
"We bombed it together fast. Kurt had the riff and brought it in, and we put it down. We Nirvana-ized it."
This song was only ever played live once, on October 23rd at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. According to LiveNirvana.com, the final track that we all know and love was the 7th take for the music, and Kurt's vocals were laid down in one take, and he did an additional 2 takes of vocal overdubs. So if you take a step back and think about it, this song at its core is a demo. It was of course polished up with an amazing mix for its release in 2002, but I think a lot of people don't realize that this wasn't meant to be a final track. This is just a demo, and my god, what a great demo, right? Can you imagine what a final version would have sounded like if they recorded this again? So, going off of Ernie's quote, let's discuss what gear Kurt used. For guitar, we are lucky enough to have a photo of the actual guitar that Kurt used at this session. Ernie has shared this photo of him restringing the high flyer that Kurt would later use for You Know You're Right. It's a little hard to tell exactly, but this is either a Phase 2 or Phase 3 high flyer with a JB in the bridge. I've heard arguments both ways about whether it looks more like a Phase 2 or a Phase 3, and I'm sure people are going to sound off in the comments about this. Like, to me, it looks more like a Phase 2, but it could really be either. But at the end of the day, it's a high flyer with a JB. And for the amp, as Ernie has said, Kurt borrowed the studio's Marshall JMP50. These are images of the actual amp that Kurt used. The amp was auctioned off by Rockstar Guitars. So we have straightforward information about which guitar and which amp was used, but stuff starts to get murky when we talk about the pedal. It's a subject that's been intensely debated among the diehard fans about which distortion pedal Kurt used for this song. So let's break it down. We know that Kurt used Ernie's pedal board. There's an early quote from Ernie in which he says that Kurt used an Ibanez SM9 for the distortion. But in recent years when asked about it, Ernie has said that Kurt used a Boss HM3. We really can't blame Ernie for this. The human memory gets foggy, especially as the years go along, and he is constantly getting asked for very specific details from 20, 30 years ago. But at the end of the day, it's been narrowed down to these 2 pedals. One of these is what Kurt used for You Know You're Right. So with all of that in mind, here's what I used to try to recreate this tone. We gotta start with this guitar. I am borrowing this amazing and beautiful vintage Univox Phase I Custom modded to Kurt's specs. The pickups are Seymour Duncan JB in the bridge, a Seymour Duncan 59 in the neck position, and also a Tune-O-Matic bridge. This guitar was sent to me to create content with by my amazing friend John. John, I will never be able to thank you enough, man, for your generosity and your trust. This guitar is beautiful. You are so lucky to own this amazing instrument, and I'm so honored to have it here for just a little bit to create these videos with, so thank you so much, man. So let's get the obvious out of the way. This isn't 100% exactly what Kurt used, because he used either a Phase 2 or a Phase 3, and this is a Phase 1. But at the end of the day, the recipe for this tone, in my opinion, seems to be a vintage high flyer with a JB. So as you heard in my full cover, this guitar gets the job done beautifully and with no issues. I've seen that some people actually debate how that chiming intro sound was done. The general consensus is that Kurt picked here behind the bridge, but I've seen it suggested that Kurt picked behind the nut up here at the headstock. Here's a quick sample of both, and I think it's pretty obvious which one Kurt did. For my amp, I'm using my Fender Tone Master Twin Reverb. I've been a little hesitant and nervous to try to dial in this tone because I don't have that Marshall JMP50 or anything similar to it. So I've been thinking this entire time, gosh, my Twin is not going to get close to that Marshall sound. This is going to be a tricky one. But surprisingly, it was the opposite. This is one of the easiest clean tones I've ever dialed in. It's taken me much longer to dial in other tones, like recently Paramount and Paradiso, to get it as perfect as I could. I spent a lot of time on those two. And if you've been watching my channel, you know that I recently added in that Behringer EQ pedal into my rig, which has been really helping me dial in those live tones. So I was ready to use the EQ pedal for this song, but when I had it on, it just made it worse. So the EQ pedal was not used at all. The clean tone is just this guitar and just my amp. Ever since I've started my channel, there's people that give me so much crap for using the Tone Master Twin Reverb. It's honestly gotten so old. I've heard everything. Oh, it's so fake because it's digital and it has no tubes. The Mesa Boogie is the Kurt amp, you need to get that. The Fender Quad is the Kurt amp, you need to get that. Your tone will never sound like Kurt's if you don't have Utah speakers. I've heard it all. I've already explained why I got the Tone Master, but I'm gonna explain it again. I got it initially to dial in bleach tones because Kurt used a Fender Twin for the majority of bleach. So my Tone Master Twin nailed that, and at the time I thought my Twin will just be a stepping stone. I'll use it for bleach tones, then I'll probably get rid of it to buy Mesa Boogie. But then I start trying to dial in other Nirvana tones with my Twin. 98% of the tones I've tried to recreate, the Twin does it beautifully. My channel would not be a thing without this amp. That's what I use in the vast majority of my videos. With it, I've recreated tones from every Nirvana studio album, every Nirvana live era, and now even the Marshall clean tone from You Know You're Right. So I've been hesitant to say this, but after this tone recreation, I'm proud to say that if you want a really versatile amp that can nail any Nirvana era, a Twin Reverb would be my recommendation. And yes, even a Tone Master, which is digital. There are a lot of videos here on YouTube of people shooting out the Tone Master Twin with a tube Twin. I was watching those as I was shopping around, and you can't really even tell the difference. I know that doesn't stop the haters, but at the end of the day, the Tone Master works amazing for Nirvana tones, and that's a hill I will die on. Okay, so now for the part I feel like most people are waiting on, the pedals. Along with his beautiful Phase I high flyer, John also sent me these two pedals. The two pedals that are intensely debated whether which one Kurt used for this recording. The Ibanez SM9 and a Boss HM3. After auditioning the two, I very quickly came to the conclusion that at least with my setup, the Ibanez gets much closer than the Boss. The Boss can get really close. These are kind of similar sounding pedals, but when I was A-Bing my guitar track to the studio track, it was very obviously the Ibanez that was getting much closer. Now, something I want to put out there, my findings do not determine anything definitively. I'm not about to announce that Kurt Cobain 100% used the Ibanez SM9 for You Know You're Right. I have no right to make definitive statements like that, I wasn't there. But this is the pedal that worked with my setup to get extremely close to that tone. If you're trying to do something similar, if you have a high flyer with a JB and you're going through a twin, grab this Ibanez pedal because that's what's going to get you that distorted tone. So with that, I had the clean tone and the distorted tone covered. But another thing I'd been nervous about when it was time to tackle this song was the insane feedback. Something I think that gets overlooked is that Kurt was a master of feedback control. He really used it as a great form of expression you can find at all points in Nirvana's career, especially at live shows. We get the impression that he could just get the feedback he wanted instantly and he just knew how to do it. Whether he wanted something really piercing or scratching to lead into like Floyd the Barber or Breed, or something really ominous and creepy, kind of like what he has going in the Something in the Way distorted BBC version. Kurt's control of feedback was just really something else, and I think You Know You're Right is the prime studio example of that. That feedback he gets particularly after the first chorus, and remember, this is just a demo, so I feel like he just got that on the whim in the moment just because he was that good at controlling feedback. So when faced with the challenge of how I'm going to try to get at least somewhat close to this feedback sound, I used this pedal, the Digitech Freqout. It's a really, really cool pedal. It's a natural feedback creator, and it was recommended to me by my really good friend Jeff of Lomic Guitars. Huge shout out to you, Jeff. Thank you for that recommendation. This really made the cover for those sections. Once Jeff knew I had this pedal, he even went the extra step of trying to recreate the feedback himself and sent me some settings and was like, hey, try this, it worked for me. And the settings that he used worked so much better than the settings I was trying to use. So these Freqout settings are courtesy of him. Thank you so much, Jeff. I can't get loud in my living situation, so this was my workaround. It's not perfect, but it's really cool and gets similar feedback vibes when used just right. I want to get ahead of something else because I know someone out there is going to say, wow, using a pedal to create fake digital feedback, that is totally not Nirvana. This is really the only option for me. I share walls with neighbors, and when I'm recording, my 4 and my 2-year-old are right above me. Like as I'm recording this, I can hear them right now and jumping around and playing. So ideally, if you were trying to get that You Know You're Right feedback, it'd be relatively simple. Just crank your amp up really loud, stand really close to it, and just let nature take its course, just get natural feedback. But that is simply just not possible with my living situation, which is why the Tone Master is my saving grace and why I'd say my channel would not exist without it and its direct out. So if you're in a situation like me where you can't crank your twin to like 7, 8, or 9, try this pedal out because it worked awesome in this application. I got mine on Amazon and it's now in my Amazon storefront, so I'll link it here so you can find it easily. But if you have the freedom and the space to get loud, don't get this pedal. Crank your amp up, stand right in front of it, and just try to get the feedback Kurt got, because that's how he did it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and an extra special shout out to my Patreon supporters. Like I said, this was by far the most requested tone I've been getting, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for your patience. I hope it was worth the wait. And this is not all that I'm doing with this guitar. There are so many cool things coming. You can expect a history video about this guitar, SNL 93 tone, Argentina tone, lots of fun things coming up. So if you aren't already, be sure to subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Nirvana Guitars, and I'll see you in the next one.